Well, good morning. I hear you. Welcome to the First United Methodist Church here in Humboldt, Tennessee. My name is Ben Barnett, and I will be your teacher this morning. Now, the last time I taught, I explained in great detail how the four teachers revolve and rotate. Well, guess what? Today is an exception. The teacher schedule for today is our pastor, Alan Grant. But Alan had some personal business, and he asked me to fill in for him. And you may also remember that last time I mentioned that the lesson material skipped over several chapters in Exodus, and I suggested that you read them for yourself. Well, it turns out that one of our online viewers did just that and sent me a text about it. Now, to be perfectly honest, it was my youngest daughter, and she knew how to contact me. But it got me to thinking, what if a stranger watches one of these Sunday school lessons and wants to contact one of us? Well, email is the best way to do that. Our church email address is, and it's on our screen, HumboldtFirstUMC@gmail.com. Put this teacher's name or a lesson date in the subject line and tell us what you think. Ask us a question, or what we would really like to hear would be a suggestion for future study. So give that some thought, and we hope to hear from you. Now, in our past time together, I've given you a brief look at some of the context of the Bible study that guides my teaching. I want to begin our lesson today by reading a few words from the introduction to the book of Exodus from the Interpreter's Bible. Biblical religion rests on a historical faith that affirms revelation. The Bible assumes throughout that God has revealed himself in unique events that attest both his freedom and his gracious initiative. But these events are nevertheless conducted and conditioned by the dimensions of time and space. They are organically related to the process of nature and history, of which they are also a part, and in whose context they occur. Consequently, every book of the Bible must be studied and understood in terms of its uniqueness as over and against its general Oriental environment. But it must likewise be studied and understood in terms of its affinity with and dependence upon this environment. And this is notably true of the book of Exodus, of which the explicit and immediate concern is the interpretation of that historic event of revelation on which the faith and community of Israel rested. Now, the title of the book is a naturalized English word that denotes the marching out in mass of a large group of people. But the word does not do full justice to the subject matter of the book, because less than half of the book deals with Israel's departure from Egypt. The largest part is about the institution and ordering of its common life. In fact, God, rather than Moses, the leader and lawgiver, or Israel, the elected and the redeemed, stands at the heart of the document. The action and triumph of God's power is the central message of the book of Exodus. Exodus is not a history of early Israel in any strict sense. It is, however, an exposition of the meaning of that history. Our text for today is Exodus 32, verses 15 through 24. Now, these verses are right in the middle of a compelling story, and the plot is hard to follow when you break it apart. It began last week and concludes on November 29th. This scripture series, Exodus 22, verse 1 through chapters 34, verse 35, are about Moses and the restoration of the covenant. Now, with all this as background, I want to say a few words about the scripture from last week before I read the lesson for today, because we need to remember these words to fully understand and appreciate the subtlety of today's verses. Moses has been on the mountain a long time, 40 days as the scripture refers. So the people became restless, and they demanded that a tangible deity be produced. Well, so they made one. Aaron collected all the gold rings from the people, melted it down, and produced what the scripture calls a golden calf. Then they had a big party. Lots of singing and dancing. God sees what they are doing and confides to Moses that he is tired of fooling around with these stiff-necked people, and will instead build the promised great nation on Moses and his descendants rather than on Abraham. And then we have an interesting dialogue. Moses argues with God and convinces God to change his mind. Verse 14 says, "And the Lord recanted of the evil which he thought to do to his people." The scripture says in no uncertain terms that the God of the Old Testament is capable of doing evil. Now, spoiler alert, this concept of God will be challenged and refuted in the New Testament. And this brings us to the scripture lesson for today, beginning with verse 15. I'm reading from the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible. Then Moses turned and went down from the mountain, carrying the 2 tablets of the covenant in his hands, tablets that were written on both sides, written on the front and on the back. The tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God, engraved upon the tablets. When Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, he said to Moses, "There's a noise of war in the camp." But then he said, "Well, it's not the sound made by victors or the sound made by losers. It's the sound of revelers that I hear." And as they came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, Moses' anger burned hot. And he threw the tablets from his hands and broke them at the foot of the mountain. He took the calf that they had made, burned it with fire, ground it to powder, and scattered it on the water, and made the Israelites drink it. And Moses said to Aaron, "What did this people do to you that you have brought this so great a sin upon them?" And Aaron said, "Do not let the anger of my Lord burn hot. You know the people. They are bent on evil. And they said to me, 'Make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what became of him.' And so I said to them, 'Whoever has gold, take it off.' And so they gave it to me. And I threw it into the fire, and out came the calf." Now, we'll deconstruct these words a little bit. A careful reading indicates that Moses had no idea of what the people are doing and has no memory of the story I just recounted from last week. Ending in verse 14, we take up at 15. This disconnect in the story is a good example of the effect of multiple traditions that resulted in the final text. The redactors had 2 accounts of the same event. They could not decide what was best, so they kept them both. In our lesson today, Moses leaves the mountain because the tablets are ready. The artist that produced the stained glass window here on my left, your right, drew inspiration from this story. Look in the upper pane. Now, why he chose to use Roman numerals on the tablets, I have no idea. And it remains a mystery. Moses meets up with Joshua, and they proceed down the mountain. But before they get very close, Joshua hears noise coming from the camp. And he first thought it was the noise of war. But as they drew closer, they decided that the sound is really boisterous singing. And when they reach the camp, Moses sees the golden calf and the dancing. And the Interpreter's Bible points out that the words found in the ancient text describe this celebration as orgiastic worship associated with fertility cults. And this may be the background for prohibitions against dancing found in some churches today. If so, I believe that it is misplaced. The people's sin was making and worshiping the idol. It was not the dancing. Moses' reaction is immediate, and the lesson describes it as his anger burned hot. To put it in more modern terms, he went ballistic. Throws the tablets on the ground and breaks them. Now remember, according to this story, they contain the most sacred of the laws given by God and were actually engraved by God onto the front and back of the stone. Is there significance to front and back? I do not know. At any rate, the stones are destroyed. And Moses isn't finished. He took the calf and threw it into the fire and burned it up. Now, this is a bit of a stretch. The melting point of gold is 1,945 degrees Fahrenheit. Normal wood fire temperature only reaches about 600 degrees Fahrenheit. But still, Moses isn't finished. He gets the melted gold out of the fire and grinds it into a powder and throws it into the camp water supply. And then makes the people drink it. Now, actually, pure elemental gold powder is not poisonous. But still, it was a symbolic and powerful metaphor as a reminder of the people's sin. This act represents what is known as a trial by ordeal. And such trials appear throughout the Bible and in some religious cults today. Moses now turns his attention to Aaron and demands to know how all this happened. And Aaron, just like we probably would, quickly tries to explain himself. And it relates his side of the story. He reminds Moses that the people are evil. And because Moses left them alone for so long a time, they became restless and demanded that I build them an idol to worship. So, I did. And it ends. No resolution, not even a response from Moses. It ends by Aaron saying, I threw the gold in the fire and the calf just jumped out. Well, the good news is the story is not over. Next Sunday is my normal time to teach, and we'll visit this story again. Thank you for your attention. Stay safe. Have a good week.